It was 2 in the morning on a rain-soaked Tuesday when a black leather briefcase slid across the checkered floor of a dilapidated diner in the suburbs of Chicago, coming to a halt right at the tip of Clara Vance's worn-out shoes. Most people would have called the police, or some would have taken the stacks of $100 bills inside and run away. But Clara was not like the others. She was a desperate, widowed mother being pushed into a corner by life. Upon opening that briefcase, she did not merely find a fortune. She also found a dossier bearing her own name, and returning it to the most dangerous man in Chicago was no longer simply a choice. It was a matter of survival. Clara's mind was still reeling as it fast-forwarded through the terrifying memory that had just unfolded minutes ago. That the bleak scenery of the night shift was abruptly torn apart when a man of authoritative stature, draped in a high-end, blood-soaked suit, stumbled into the diner. That man was Julian Rossi. He had only just sat down in the most obscured corner when a frenzied barrage of gunfire from unknown assassins outside completely shattered the diner's entire glass storefront. Amidst the deafening rain of bullets and shards of glass flying everywhere, that man escaped through the back door with a chillingly cold and professional demeanor. The heavy leather briefcase was accidentally dropped by him in a dark, hidden corner of the flooded alley as he climbed over the fence. As the piercing gunfire ceased and the wailing sirens of the police began to shriek from afar, the survival instinct and a burning desire to protect her child completely overpowered the fear within Clara's heart. Thinking of her 5-year-old son named Sam, who was lying fatally at home with chronic asthma and drowning in debt, she hastily rushed outside, picked up the leather briefcase, and concealed it deep inside a giant black plastic garbage bag right before the flashing red and blue lights of the patrol cars swarmed the scene. Throughout the police lockdown and interrogation process, Clara calmly played the role of an obedient, deeply panicked waitress, thereby successfully hiding the complete existence of that briefcase full of deadly secrets. The moment the officer nodded his permission to leave, she immediately clutched the garbage bag tightly to her chest, stumbling as she dashed out of the ruins and ran for her life through the freezing, biting rainstorm, heading toward her shabby apartment. Returning to the miserable apartment located on the 4th floor, Clara tremblingly locked the 3 layers of the door and then tiptoed past the battered sofa, where her 5-year-old son named Sam was sleeping soundly with labored, wheezing breaths caused by the tormenting asthma. She placed a gentle kiss on her child's forehead and then hugged the black garbage bag, sneaking into the cramped bathroom, carefully turning the inside lock to ensure not a single sound could wake the child. Sitting down heavily on the edge of the chipped porcelain bathtub, her freezing hands still trembled incessantly as she pulled the glossy black leather briefcase out of the plastic layer. Struggling to suppress her violently beating heart inside her chest, Clara pulled a screwdriver and a hammer from the tool drawer, wedged the steel tip into the crack of the bullet-grazed lock, and struck it with decisive hammer blows. The lock burst open with a deafening crack. She flipped the lid of the briefcase up and immediately had to hold her breath at the sight exposed before her eyes. One entire side of the briefcase was tightly packed with brand new stacks of $50 and $100 bills, neatly arranged in layers, estimated to amount to hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was a massive fortune that could permanently change her deadened life, yet Clara's gaze was drawn to the items lying in the other half of the briefcase. Tucked securely beneath a leather mesh was a thick, black hard drive featuring military-grade encryption, and resting right below it was a brown manila paper envelope carefully sealed with red wax. Clara's scratched hand slowly reached out, breaking the wax seal and dumping all the contents upside down onto the closed toilet lid. Dozens of photographs fluttered out, forcing her to cover her mouth with her hand to prevent a horrified scream from escaping. They were candid shots of her carrying Sam away from kindergarten, pictures of her reading bedtime stories to her child through the apartment window, and even the moments she quietly stepped out of the rundown diner at dawn. The dates printed on the corners of the photos proved they had been taken continuously over 3 grueling years. A freezing chill ran down her spine as Clara realized the cruel truth that the lives of her and her child had never been peaceful, but that they had always been prey, closely monitored every step of the way by faceless stalkers in the shadows. Pushing the chilling photos aside with hands still trembling violently, Clara continued to rummage and found a thick stack of legal documents lying deep at the bottom of the envelope. Her eyes skimmed over the words on the trust agreement and stopped dead when she saw an attached autopsy report. That cold piece of paper stripped bare a horrifying truth about the death of her husband, Mark Vance, whom she had always believed passed away in a tragic traffic accident. Mark did not die from an accident in reality. His body was covered in the marks of brutal torture before he was savagely executed. Sandwiched between the pile of papers was a handwritten letter bearing the sharp penmanship of Julian Rossi, revealing that her seemingly boring accountant husband was actually a notorious money launderer for the mob boss Victor Falcone. Mark had stolen $50 million from the organization to quietly acquire prime real estate properties and left all inheritance rights under Clara's name. Falcone's gang killed Mark for the crime of theft, but they still could not retrieve the red book certifying the ownership of the land. The letter also clarified that Julian Rossi, the mysterious man at the diner, had sent people to silently protect her from Falcone's clutches, hoping to one day seize this golden piece of land back. The cramped bathroom seemed to spin before the widowed mother's eyes as Clara realized the legacy her husband left behind was not an escape, but a bloody death sentence, pushing her into an inescapable corner between two of the most notorious and ruthless mafia factions in the underworld. The dim light of dawn gradually dispelled the pitch-black night, bringing a chilling silence that enveloped the young mother's troubled mind. Sitting with her knees pulled up on the freezing bathroom floor, Clara bitterly recognized the cruel truth that she and her child could never run away from the clutches of the mafia underworld once they had been targeted. Instead of continuing to be a weak prey hiding in fear waiting to be slaughtered, she made the boldest decision of her life. As soon as the sun rose, she carefully woke the little boy Sam, gently taking her precious son to kindergarten with a warm kiss to hide the despair churning in the depths of her eyes. Returning to the apartment, Clara chose to wear the most decent outfit she had, a simple shirt along with a worn-out black pencil skirt, then grabbed the shattered leather briefcase and headed straight to the giant glass and steel skyscraper of the Rossi Corporation, standing tall in the center of downtown Chicago. Just as she stepped through the luxurious revolving doors, her haggard appearance and old shoes were immediately blocked at the main lobby by a line of black-suited bodyguards with scrutinizing and disdainful glares. However, instead of backing down, Clara held her head high facing the security system, using a firm, unwavering voice to drop a heavily implied threat about the deadly classified documents resting snugly inside the torn briefcase in her hands. It was this cold determination and fearless attitude that forced the impenetrable security wall to yield, compelling them to pick up the internal phone and dial straight to the boss Julian Rossi on the top floor. Only a few minutes after that fateful call, Clara was escorted by two massive bodyguards into a private elevator and taken straight up to the penthouse office located on the highest floor of the tower. As the oak doors closed behind her back, she found herself standing in the midst of the most lavish space, facing Julian Rossi, the powerful mafia boss bearing a muscular physique but whose left arm had to be carefully bandaged after last night's shootout. The image of a widowed mother in worn-out clothes, her shoes worn at the heels, standing clutching the torn leather briefcase created a stark contrast with the imposing, dangerous aura of the man who ruled the entire underworld. A suffocating silence blanketed the massive room, lasting until Clara proactively broke it with a voice filled with profound indignation. She bluntly threw the shattered briefcase onto the solid walnut desk, bitterly questioning Julian as to why he knew all the truth about her husband's death, knew well the enormous legacy she was named under, yet still heartlessly left her and her child to cower in poverty and be constantly stalked by danger for 3 long years. Faced with those forceful accusations, Julian was not angry but slowly stepped closer, his sharp, cold eyes narrowing slightly as he carefully reassessed the small woman standing before him. Instead of seeing a weak prey in a state of utter panic out of fear of the mafia's authority, Julian only saw a resilient mother bristling, ready to bare her fangs and claws to protect her little boy at all costs. Julian slowly spoke in a low, deep voice, explaining to Clara the grim dilemma in which she was trapped. He frankly exposed the brutal reality that if she obediently signed the papers transferring that prime land to him, Victor Falcone would certainly know both sides had colluded, and he would mercilessly kill her solely for the purpose of revenge. On the other hand, if she chose to grab her child and run, Falcone would never let her go either, but would madly hunt the mother and child to the ends of the earth to snatch back the hard drive containing his entire massive financial network tucked neatly inside the briefcase. It seemed every door to survival had slammed shut before the eyes of this solitary young mother. Yet, amidst that ultimate despair, Julian unexpectedly offered a solution so crazy it was hard to believe, but it was the only path of life to save both of their lives. With an incredibly sharp, calculating gaze, the boss proposed that Clara step into a marriage with him. He wanted to exploit a loophole in a strictly inviolable rule of the Supreme Mafia Council, which clearly stipulated that a boss wife was an absolute no-go zone that no one was allowed to touch. Only by becoming the lady of the Rossi Empire could she and the boy Sam be placed under the strongest protective umbrella in the city, completely neutralizing all assassination attempts from Falcone's organization in exchange for that massive real estate property being legally merged into Julian's territory. That the silence enveloping the lavish space of the top-floor office seemed to thicken to the point of suffocation right after the insane proposal left Julian Rossi's mouth. The young mother's heart skipped a beat, utterly shocked at the prospect of having to personally bind the rest of her life to a notorious, cold-blooded mafia boss, a man who ruled half of the brutality-filled underworld of Chicago. But facing the abyss of death waiting to swallow both mother and child, the fierce maternal instinct to protect swept away all weakness, helping Clara's reason maintain an astonishingly clear and sharp alertness. She took a deep breath to fill her lungs with the cold air, trying to suppress the rapid, drum-like beating in her chest. Her hands, which had been trembling with fear, were now clenched into two small fists hidden along the folds of her worn skirt, while her resilient gaze lifted, looking straight at the muscular, heavily murderous figure standing majestically opposite her. Unconcerned with the lowly status of a diner waitress standing amidst a den of evil, Clara spoke up loud and clear, articulating every single word that she accepted entering into this crazy marriage on paper to legitimize the merger of the massive real estate property, but at the same time, she did not hesitate to lay down ironclad conditions that could absolutely never be negotiated or compromised. Her firm voice echoed between the solid walnut-paneled walls, demanding that Julian Rossi swear a solemn oath on the very honor of a family head that this marriage would forever remain merely a business transaction cover, absolutely never allowing any inappropriate touching or any forced demands regarding physical relations between two complete strangers, and in exchange for this cooperation, he must immediately provide an absolutely safe living environment. An impenetrable fortress strong enough to isolate the mother and child from the bullets of hatred and the toxic smog of the filthy city. Along with that, the boss must be responsible for paying for and bringing in a medical team comprising the top specialists in the nation along with the most modern equipment to monitor, care for, and completely cure the wicked asthma that was tormenting the weak breaths of the boy Sam. Every day and every hour. To solidify her small and precarious position right inside the tiger's den, Clara proactively took a step toward the desk, narrowing the distance with the most dangerous man in the city. She opened her unwavering eyes wide, looking deep into the boss' freezing ice-blue pupils and boldly uttered a devastating threat, firmly asserting that if her precious son suffered even a tiny scratch due to negligent protection, or encountered any harm from the enemies in his underworld, she would not hesitate to personally take the hard drive containing Victor Falcone's entire deadly financial network and hand it over directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. In a dark and cruel underworld where Julian Rossi's commands were the supreme law, where his presence always sowed absolute terror, making even the most hardened gangsters bow down trembling, the rare audacity and extraordinary courage of a small woman bearing the impoverished status of a widow created a genuine shock that made Julian unable to suppress a low laugh echoing throughout the room. That rare laughter carried no mockery or anger of an offended superior, but rather harbored a fascinating surprise mixed with a deep, intense, and secret respect for his new partner. Julian realized the woman standing before him was not an obedient sacrificial pawn, but a true female warrior ready to burn down the whole world to protect her child. Right at the moment the intensely fiery, resilient gaze of the mother intersected with the sharp, calculating look of the mafia boss, a pact with the devil was officially established, driving the final nail into the coffin, permanently burying Clara Vance's miserable past and officially drawing the curtains to open a new chapter filled with unpredictable events in the kingdom of darkness. As soon as the life and death agreements were just settled amidst the suffocating silence of the penthouse office, Julian Rossi did not waste another single precious second. With a calm demeanor yet containing the absolute authority of an emperor in the underworld, he reached out his uninjured arm, lifted the glossy black internal phone placed on the solid walnut desk, and dialed a carefully encrypted sequence of numbers. The boss' low, cold, and absolutely commanding voice immediately rang out, ordering the head of the security department to instantly mobilize the most advanced armored convoy along with the most skilled gunmen to go pick up the boy Sam. The red code order being issued meant the entire defensive and offensive system of the Rossi family would be activated at the highest level to ensure the absolute safety of the target. However, just as Julian finished speaking and was about to hang up the phone, the atmosphere in the room suddenly became extremely tense when Clara unexpectedly rushed forward, her tiny hand gripping the boss' sturdy wrist with the strongest force she could generate. Disregarding the razor-sharp glares of the bodyguard standing guard outside the door that might be pointing straight at her, the instinct to protect her child of a mother urged her to insistently demand to personally contact the homeroom teacher at the kindergarten before that black-clad army stormed in. Clara's pale face scrunched up with worry. She argued in a decisive and highly intense tone that Sam had only just turned 5, the boy inherently had a weak constitution and was extremely sensitive to strangers. Letting a group of massive, fierce-looking men, dressed in pitch-black suits and brandishing weapons, suddenly appear to take the boy away would certainly throw the child into a state of absolute panic, and that peak psychological stress could very well trigger an acute asthma attack directly threatening her son's life before he could even step into the car. Clara's determination and profound understanding of child psychology made Julian pause for a moment. His deep gaze swept over the woman's face, which was overflowing with indignation mixed with a trace of fear, and then, contrary to the expectations of those accustomed to the boss dictatorship, Julian yielded. He slowly handed the phone to Clara, allowing her to dial the number to the school. With an extraordinary effort to suppress the trembling in her voice, Clara spoke gently to the teacher, provided the emergency child pickup passcode, and then asked to speak directly with Sam. Upon hearing her son's adorable, lisping voice ring out over the other end of the line, Clara's heart seemed to tighten. She tried to force the brightest smile in her mind, fabricating a sweet fairy tale that Mommy had just won a special prize and the tall uncles in black coats coming to pick him up were secret agents who would escort both mother and child to a safe castle. Only when certain that Sam was completely reassured and eagerly anticipating the new adventure did Clara sigh in relief and hang up. Exactly 30 minutes after that fateful call, the emergency evacuation process officially began under the strict protection of dart gun barrels. Clara was personally escorted by 2 high-ranking bodyguards into the back seat of an ultra-luxury, bulletproof armored Maybach. As the heavy car door, clad in layers of ultra-hard alloy, slammed shut with a dull thud, it simultaneously severed all her ties with the outside world. Sitting swallowed up amidst the plush suede interior space filled with a faint masculine scent and extreme luxury, Clara clutched the torn leather briefcase to her chest like a final life preserver. Through the thick, dark-tinted window glass, capable of withstanding the most horrific destructive forces, her eyes, carrying so many unspoken thoughts, quietly watched every familiar scene slipping away behind her. The run-down slum areas with peeling walls, the narrow alleys overflowing with garbage and lurking with vices, the shabby late-night diner where she had exhausted her labor for so many years, and even the days of struggling in extreme poverty were gradually receding far away into the blurry rain dust. The car glided smoothly on the wet asphalt surface, leaving behind a past full of bleeding wounds and inescapable despair. Not a single tear of regret fell, for Clara knew clearly that today's choice was the only path to bring life to her precious son. The moment the wheels rolled past the boundary of the poor suburbs to head straight onto the wide avenue toward the north of the city, Clara Vance officially stepped across the boundary of light and darkness, completely shedding the life of an unfortunate waitress to proudly march into the deep underworld, where power, money, and blood always walked hand in hand within a new empire of which she was about to become the female master. The majestic armored convoy slowly advanced through the soaring, elaborately forged iron gates, the tires rubbing gently on the pure white gravel path, bringing Clara into the fortified mansion grounds, an impenetrable fortress belonging to Julian Rossi, lying silently in the most prime location. Surrounding them were lush green lawns trimmed to perfection down to the centimeter, and rows of ancient oak trees hundreds of years old, standing tall like silent guards protecting a powerful underworld empire. As peaceful as the exterior scenery was, the internal precautions were equally strict, with dozens of hidden security cameras along with sullen figures leading fierce sniffer dogs patrolling along the stone fence. Just as she tremblingly stepped foot into the magnificent main hall paved with polished imported marble slabs, flooded with brilliant light radiating from the giant crystal chandeliers suspended from the soaring ceiling, the widowed mother's heart seemed to shatter into 100 pieces when she saw her precious little boy Sam standing bewildered in a center position that the tiny child, clutching his little backpack tightly to his chest, was swallowed up among a pack of massive men in black suits, with terrifyingly lifeless faces. No longer caring about any strict underworld rules or the cold, scrutinizing gazes of the guards around, Clara tossed aside the leather briefcase containing the massive fortune, dashed forward like an arrow piercing the wind, and collapsed onto the cold floor to embrace her only flesh and blood. The bitter and terrified tears that had been suppressed for so long were finally free to fall, soaking her pale and haggard cheeks. She buried her tear-stained face into the small crook of his neck, carrying the familiar scent of cheap shower gel, her arms tightly squeezing the boy's frail body, endlessly whispering through choked sobs the sweetest comforting words that Mommy was here, Mommy would never let anyone hurt him, and everything was truly completely safe now. The little boy Sam wrapped his tiny arms tightly around his mother's neck, his big, innocent, round eyes still wide open, admiring the expensive original art pieces hanging along the walls and the magnificent architecture all around, innocently asking in his clear childish voice if Mommy really won the jackpot like the uncles in black coats said, and if from now on they would move to live forever in a castle. Amidst the moment of reunion brimming with sacred maternal love that melted away even the majestic and extremely tense atmosphere of the Mafia lair, the notorious boss Julian Rossi took slow, steady steps advancing toward the mother and child hugging each other on the floor. His overwhelmingly dominant presence immediately made the entire surrounding elite bodyguard squad bow their heads. Very low and silently step back to make way. Yet, instead of uttering coldly ruthless words or giving orders in a brutish manner like he usually did with his subordinates, the muscular man bearing countless slash scars and the life and death responsibility of one of the largest criminal gangs in the city unexpectedly displayed a soft, warm side that was hard to believe. Julian slowly took a knee down onto the cold granite floor, lowering his massive, highly threatening height so his normally sharp, icy gaze could be on the same level with the clear, innocent eyes of the 5-year-old child. He spoke in a warm, deep voice, trying to tone down his terrifying aura to become unusually gentle, introducing himself as the master of this vast place and thoughtfully coaxing the boy Sam with a highly attractive promise of an exclusive nighttime tour at the largest dinosaur museum downtown, where he would order the entire place closed so the boy could freely run around and gaze at the giant Tyrannosaurus skeletons all by himself without being bothered or crowded by anyone. Sam's timid eyes immediately lit up with indescribable excitement and joy, the boy seemingly forgetting all his initial fear and shyness, obediently nodding in agreement with full eagerness to the enchanting offer of this huge but seemingly very kind man. However, that rare sweet, warm, and peaceful moment, like a beautiful miracle weaving its way through the wolf's den, could not last long before being quickly extinguished in an incredibly harsh and ruthless manner by a rude, sharp, and maliciously dripping, throat-clearing sound echoing from the end of the dimly lit hallway. A middle-aged man with a thin appearance but exuding a spine-chilling sharpness, insidiousness, and coldness slowly stepped out from the darkness that was none other than Thomas Sterling, the supremely powerful senior advisor, the irreplaceable right-hand man, and also the sharp strategic mind who had accompanied the prosperity of the Rossi family for over 20 years. His eyes, sharp as poison-laced razor blades, swept condescendingly over Clara's worn, cheap clothes and the fearful clinging of the boy Sam with an absolute disdain he had no intention of hiding. In a grating voice filled with venom, Thomas clearly expressed a bitter, hostile attitude, bluntly tossing out deeply sarcastic words aimed at humiliating the dignity and completely despising the low-class background of a waitress like Clara as she dared to confidently step foot into the sacred power center of the underworld. He did not hesitate to act superior and warn Julian right in front of everyone about the potential danger and the horrific humiliation the family's honor would suffer if they brought such a weak seed, such superfluous and troublesome baggage into the house, thereby using the authority of an elder to intentionally crush the hopes of life for the mother and child. while simultaneously marking the highly thorny beginning of a fierce, treacherous hidden war right under the shared roof that Clara was forced to resiliently confront to fight for survival. Even as the tense atmosphere reeking of hostility created by the advisor Thomas Sterling still enveloped the magnificent main hall, Julian Rossi did not pay the slightest attention to the insolent attitude of his subordinate, but merely calmly signaled a massive bodyguard to step forward. With a deep but equally authoritative voice, the boss ordered his subordinate to take the boy Sam down to the mansion's massive kitchen area, instructing the head chef to prepare the most exquisite desserts to treat this special little guest. Even though waves of unease and fear still churned in her heart at having to take her eyes off her only flesh and blood, Clara still tried to force a constrained smile, gently petting Sam's head and whispering sweet, comforting words so the boy would obediently hook pinkies and follow the strange bodyguard. When the small silhouette of her son just disappeared behind the corner of the hallway lined with deep red velvet carpet, the smile on Clara's lips immediately vanished, giving way to an astonishingly cold, resolute, and iron-willed expression. She took a deep breath, straightened her thin shoulders hidden beneath the worn-out coat, and forcefully stepped forward to trail behind Julian's broad back and the spiteful tailing of Thomas to head straight into the quiet office located in the west wing of the fortress. The solid oak doors, inlaid with intricate patterns, closed heavily, completely isolating the world inside from all outside prying eyes. In stark contrast to the splendid and brilliantly lit space of the main hall, the boss office exuded an aura of gloom, power, and a suffocating oppressiveness, with walls completely covered by dark mahogany bookshelves and the musty scent of premium cigars intertwining with the smell of printer ink on thick stacks of documents. Standing cowering right next to the massive desk was a city government official with a face pale from fear, his forehead dotted with cold sweat that incessantly poured down, having to face directly the most dangerous figures in the underworld. The official tremblingly pushed forward a pre-drafted stack of legal documents along with a gold-kept fountain pen, stammering through the procedural clauses as hastily as possible. There was not a single pure white wedding dress draped over the bride, there were no brilliant bouquets of roses or romantically melodious music, and of course, there was not a single vow of a lifetime commitment uttered from the mouths of the two main characters. The strangest wedding in the history of the Rossi family took place in a flash, practical and cold, much like a signing ceremony for the merger of two cold-blooded economic conglomerates. Clara took the heavy fountain pen without the slightest hesitation or trembling, decisively directing the soft strokes of her name straight onto the dotted line located on the final page of the marriage registration paper. The sharp sound of the pen nib scraping against the paper surface echoed amidst the quiet space, followed by a deafening, heavy thud as the city official hastily slammed the bright red overlapping seal down onto the life and death contract. Within just those few brief moments, the life of a single mother struggling with extra late-night shifts was completely erased, and Clara Vance officially became Clara Rossi, bearing the title of the most powerful lady of the notorious Mafia empire. Right after the legal ritual was completed, the government official hastily packed his belongings and slipped quickly out the door as if fleeing a tiger's den, leaving the three people standing facing each other in an atmosphere thick with tension. Clara did not hesitate for another second. She slowly opened the lid of the smashed leather briefcase, pulled out the manila envelope once sealed with red wax, and solemnly handed over the entire stack of papers certifying ownership of the prime land in the southern part of the city to Julian. The boss received the priceless stack of documents with a calm demeanor, his ice-blue eyes flashing with a ray of satisfaction as his kingdom was now fully and legally protected. He immediately turned to look straight at the supreme advisor, using an ironclad voice steeped in the symbolic nature of absolute power to order Thomas to instantly send a message to all 5 of the largest families across the territory, clearly declaring that Clara was now his wife. The entire legacy of the old family now belonged to the Rossi family, and any threatening move or intrusion aimed at her would be considered a direct act of war against the Supreme Council. That defiant and weighty declaration was like a match thrown straight into a powder keg waiting to explode inside Thomas Sterling's heart. The cunning old man could no longer maintain his usual falsely calm facade, his face scrunched up in anger, blue veins bulging on his forehead as he slammed his fist hard onto the wooden desk and roared out furious warnings. With the most venomous language, Thomas continuously berated Julian that he was playing an incredibly dangerous game by personally bringing a horrific disaster into the house, that Clara was merely a weak seed, an outsider carrying deadly troubles from an ex-husband who was a despicable thief. He stubbornly insisted that shielding this woman would sooner or later drag along the comprehensive collapse of an entire empire that had been built with blood and tears over decades. However, in response to the advisor's mad fury, Julian only maintained an attitude cold to the point of cruelty. He used the absolute authority of a supreme leader to immediately snuff out the insolent objections, forbidding Thomas from uttering another single insult aimed at his lady. The fiery gazes colliding between the two most powerful men in the room officially deepened an irreparable rift, marking a massive and highly dangerous fracture within the internal structure of the Rossi family, signaling the catastrophic hidden storms about to sweep through the newly blossomed life of the young mother. 3 days passed since the fateful day of that turbulent marriage contract signing ceremony. The lives of mother and child Clara had put on a completely new appearance. Extravagantly lavish yet bringing a suffocatingly oppressive feeling. Julian Rossi's promise had been perfectly fulfilled down to the smallest detail as the boy Sam was immediately examined and treated by the top respiratory specialists in the country. The wicked asthma attacks that once squeezed the 5-year-old child's weak breaths had now gradually receded, returning rosy cheeks and perfectly peaceful slumbers to Sam without the laborious wheezing that made the mother's heart ache. Stepping into the massive bedroom reserved for the lady, Clara was overwhelmed by a gigantic wardrobe overflowing with the most glamorous designer outfits, sparkling evening gowns, expensive high-end leather shoes, and countless precious jewelry pieces prepared solely to serve her new status. Yet, hidden beneath those covers of velvet, silk, and sparkling gold and silver, the widowed mother bitterly realized she had stepped from one destitute circumstance into another tragic house arrest. The fortified mansion situated in the quiet suburbs with lush green lawns and solid stone fences now resembled a magnificent golden cage built solely to strip away a person's most precious possession, which is freedom. Clara was completely grounded, absolutely forbidden from stepping foot outside the fortress grounds under the pretext of ensuring maximum security during a sensitive time. Every step she took inside the house was followed by the cold, scrutinizing gazes of the black-clad bodyguards assigned to monitor her. Additionally, the presence of her husband in name was incredibly faint as Julian was continuously absent day and night. He had to dive into life-and-death negotiations shrouded in cigar smoke, constantly moving between territories to cast a net of power in order to thoroughly resolve erupting conflicts, as well as to cope with the hostile prying of other Mafia families aiming to tear apart the benefits following his abrupt marriage of territorial acquisition nature. The chillingly quiet atmosphere of the vast castle, combined with the loneliness and alienation amidst a den of cold-blooded killers, pushed Clara's psychology into a state of peak tension. Even though her body rested on the most expensive mattresses, her mind was always in a state of high alert, constantly fearing the invisible dangers lurking all around, leading to chronic insomnia tormenting her every night. As the fourth night descended, the space of the mansion sank into a pitch-black silence, leaving only the sound of the wind howling through the ancient oak tree canopies outside the window. Clara tossed and turned on the giant, soft bed, but her eyes remained wide open, restlessly staring at the intricately carved ceiling. Unable to endure the suffocating silence gnawing and enveloping her troubled mind any longer, she decided to throw off the warm fleece blanket and sit up, temporarily draping a flimsy silk robe over her thin shoulders, and quietly left the bedroom. Her bare feet made not even the slightest sound, gliding softly on the freezing marble floor. Clara intended to wander down to the kitchen area on the ground floor to find a glass of warm water to soothe her nerves, which were taut as a bowstring. The surrounding space was as dark and silent as a grave. The brilliant crystal chandeliers of the daytime were now all turned off, leaving only the wall lamps emitting a feeble, yellowish glow, casting long, bizarre, and ghostly shadows along the walls adorned with time-stained portraits. The space was so still she could clearly hear every single heartbeat thumping inside her chest. Just as she stepped past the familiar corner to enter the east corridor area of the building, a place that was always naturally shrouded in darkness at this hour, Clara's aimless steps suddenly halted, her breath seemingly caught in her throat as she accidentally discovered a spine-chilling anomaly. The solid oak door leading to the secluded office at the very end of the hallway was not tightly locked and strictly guarded as usual, but was slightly ajar in a highly vulnerable manner, leaking a thin, blurry streak of light cutting across the dark, glossy floor. Accompanying that faintly glowing, suspicious light were mysterious, muffled whispers, steeped in stealthiness, murmuring from inside the quiet room. In the dead of night, at a place where discipline and safety were always prioritized above all else, this anomaly immediately rang a deep warning bell, urging an intense curiosity mixed with an extreme surge of unease in the young mother's mind, forcing her to hold her breath and tiptoe step by slow step toward that deadly streak of light to find out what kind of demon was hiding in the shadows of the castle. Pressing her trembling, thin back against the cold plaster wall covered in layers of embossed classic patterned wallpaper along the dark hallway, Clara held her breath, trying to deflate her chest as much as possible to prevent even the slightest sound or a heavy breath from accidentally slipping out into the silent space. Her wide, tense eyes carefully leaned close to the narrow crack of the half-open oak door, squinting through the thin streak of light reflecting on the shiny floor to scout the situation inside the quiet room. Under the yellowish light cast from the green leather desk lamp, the thin but deeply sinister silhouette of Thomas Sterling appeared incredibly clear. The esteemed supreme advisor of the Rossi family, who always wore a facade of moral rectitude and erudition, showing absolute loyalty during the day, was now standing with his back to the door, one hand shoved deep into his expensive tailored trousers, the other tightly gripping a cheap plastic flip phone, the kind of untraceable burner phone meant only for the dirtiest and shadiest transactions in the underworld. His voice no longer retained the arrogant disdain or the grating tone of a superior like when he cursed her in the main hall, but was compressed into faint, raspy hisses full of cunning, much like the sound of a venomous snake preparing to spit venom. Clara strained her ears to listen to every word dropping into the oppressive atmosphere, and then all the blood in her veins seemed to freeze. A freezing chill ran from the top of her head down to her heels when she vaguely heard the name mentioned on the other end of the line with an obedient reverence, being none other than Victor Falcone. That was the notorious, cold-blooded Mafia boss, Julian's sworn enemy, and also her worst nightmare, the man who had ordered the brutal torture and stolen her husband's life. A terrifying and cruel truth was gradually stripped bare in the encroaching darkness, every puzzle piece of the bloody picture slowly fitting together in the spinning, reeling mind of the young mother. From Thomas' own mouth came the smug admission over the phone that he was the very vicious mole who had secretly sold out Julian's exact location at the shabby diner on that fateful stormy night, nearly pushing the boss to his death if not for her coincidental appearance. However, the treachery of this sly old man did not just stop at one failed assassination attempt. Right at this moment, with a sinister and spine-chillingly cold voice, Thomas was meticulously mapping out a venomous plan to completely finish off the Rossi dynasty and uproot her and her child. He was closely colluding with Falcone to create a large-scale decoy ambush at the crucial port area situated at the edge of the city, where many of the gang's core economic interests were concentrated. The purpose of this bloody act was to strike at Julian's vulnerable points of honor and territory, forcing the boss, who was inherently hot-tempered and highly aggressive, to personally lead the entire most elite security team out of the fortress mansion to quell the rebellion. Thomas calculated extremely precisely that the moment Julian fell for the trap and led his troops away, the fortified defense system of the castle would fall into its thinnest and loosest state. At that exact critical moment of life and death, the treacherous advisor with his saintly face would personally and silently use his high-level clearance to disable the security warning layers. Then personally swing wide the tempered steel gate of the underground service tunnel system, creating a perfect single path to intercept Falcone's bloodthirsty team of assassins, allowing them to easily sneak inside the grounds without encountering any resistance. The ultimate goal of this pack of hungry wolves craving fresh meat was not an ordinary bloody assassination, but to capture Clara and her child alive, using the fragile life of the boy Sam and her own safety as a perfect extortion tool. To force Julian Rossi to obediently hand over the hard drive containing the massive financial network, while simultaneously seizing back control of the priceless real estate that her husband had traded his very life to leave behind. Every word uttered from the old advisor's mouth was like invisible knives coated in poison piercing her eardrums, plunging straight into Clara's rapidly beating heart. A chill running down her spine caused her to instinctively step back, nearly tripping over the fold of the wool area rug. She hurriedly brought her freezing hands up to tightly cover her mouth to prevent a horrified gasp from accidentally escaping, her eyes wide open, staring into the darkness filled with peak indignation mixed with ultimate terror. The darkness of the Mafia world did not just lurk out in the filthy world out there, but the most terrifying monster was coiling up, spreading venom right under the same roof, breathing the same air, and sitting at the same dining table with the very people it was about to heartlessly push to their deaths. Knowing that lingering for even another second would instantly end her life beneath the silencer-equipped gun of the traitor if he suddenly turned around and discovered her presence, Clara bit her lower lip until it bled, carefully lifting her heavy bare feet to slowly retreat into the dark zone of the hallway. She silently withdrew to the bedroom with a will to survive burning more fiercely than ever, for she knew very well that she could not continue being a weak prey, resigning herself and leaving her fate for the Reaper to decide, but had to stand up herself and find a way to set an invisible, deadly trap to protect the only flesh and blood of her life. Returning to the massive bedroom with her heart still pounding as if to burst her chest after witnessing the terrifying secret in the east corridor, Clara collapsed onto the edge of the bed, her hands holding her face which had turned pale from horror. In the moment facing the quiet darkness of the night, the sharp mind of the young mother began to analyze the utterly desperate situation in which she was trapped. She bitterly recognized a cruel truth of the underworld that absolutely no one, not even the boss Julian Rossi himself, would believe the physically unproven accusation of a fake wife who had appeared a mere 3 days ago against the supreme advisor who had stood side by side and sacrificed his blood and bones for 20 grueling years for the family's prosperity. If she foolishly exposed this truth to the light with empty words, the cunning Thomas Sterling would certainly easily reverse the situation, branding her with the crime of slander to divide the internal ranks, and using that excuse to eliminate her and her child in a completely legal manner according to the cruel laws of the Mafia world. Understanding that a direct confrontation would only lead to an inevitable tragic death, Clara decided to take action herself, transforming herself from a weak prey waiting to die into an invisible trapper. When the faint morning rays of the next day just pierced through the window curtains, she wrapped herself in the perfect facade of a mother extremely worried and haggard from insomnia. Clara proactively sought out the central security control room, encountering the head of security bearing a cold face crisscrossed with scars. With a trembling voice mixed with a desperate plea, she tactfully complained about the boy Sam continuously having horrific nightmares because he had not yet adapted to this overly large and strange living environment. From there, she made a seemingly tiny and entirely harmless request, asking to be granted access to the mansion's internal wireless network to install a baby monitor system to keep track of her child's sleep, allowing her to peacefully watch her son from afar without having to stay awake all night to keep guard. Even though the Fortress cyber defense system was established with the strictest security standards that did not allow any foreign signals to infiltrate, faced with the maternal pleading of the legitimate lady, coupled with the subjective assumption that a cheap baby monitor device could not create any fatal loopholes, the head of security finally nodded in agreement and granted her a password giving access limited to the lowest level. As soon as she achieved her goal, Clara immediately requested a servant to order a standard baby monitor set online, but hidden inside the order delivered that afternoon were 2 sophisticated miniature cameras, the size of a matchbox, which she had secretly bought along with it. By mid-afternoon, taking advantage of the time when the mansion was busy with the shift change of the armed bodyguard team and all attention was focused on the main gate area, Clara quietly left Sam sleeping soundly in his room under the watch of a trustworthy maid, grabbed her dark coat, and began her journey sneaking deep down to the restricted area underground. Her heart beat incessantly as if it wanted to jump out of her chest as every tiptoeing footstep descended the damp stone spiral staircase, entering the dark and freezing service tunnel area in the basement, where there were only the groaning sounds of the water pipe system and air thick with the smell of mold. Relying on patched-together memories from the architectural blueprints she had coincidentally memorized while cleaning Julian's office a few days prior, Clara carefully squeezed past giant oak barrels filled with moss-covered wine, feeling her way in the dim light of the backup lamps, until she found her target. That was the sturdy tempered steel magnetic door connecting straight to the secret escape route heading toward the port, exactly the location the treacherous Thomas had mentioned in his conspiratorial phone call last night. With hands shaking violently due to peak tension and the bone-chilling cold of the underground cellar, Clara quickly took the second camera out of her coat pocket that she risked her life climbing onto an old aluminum ladder forgotten nearby, stretching her body up as high as possible, and cleverly fastened that tiny recording device into a dark hidden corner blending into the cobweb-covered ventilation pipe system right on the ceiling. After carefully adjusting the angle to ensure the ultra-small lens pointed straight at and covered the entire biometric card reader panel of the steel door, she turned on her mobile phone screen, holding her breath waiting for the signal synchronization process over the internal wireless network. When an incredibly sharp black and white frame clearly displaying the entire entrance area to the underground cellar appeared on the touch screen, a sigh of relief finally dared to escape the young mother's dry lips. The deadly trap had been perfectly and exquisitely laid right under the noses of professional killers, and the cunning old advisor. Clara hastily cleaned up the scene, carefully erased all traces, and followed the old path back to the bedroom safely and smoothly. Now, sitting hugging her knees on the luxurious sofa, her eyes remained constantly glued to the phone screen broadcasting live from beneath the ground. She was no longer a passive victim waiting for the Reaper to knock on the door, but had transformed herself into a patient hunter hiding in the shadows, tightly clutching the only technological weapon capable of exposing the traitor to prepare to strike a fatal blow, determined to use her very life to protect the absolute safety of her precious son amidst the brutal vortex of schemes in the kingdom of darkness waiting to swallow both mother and child. Time ticked away second by second in the suffocating silence of the quiet evening at the North Shore Fortress mansion, where Clara counted every heartbeat thumping in her chest waiting for the moment the trap would spring. The vast space of the castle seemed to hold its breath along with the young mother, hiding the dark plots waiting to explode. At exactly 45 minutes past 9 at night, the fake piece of the castle was abruptly torn apart by a series of piercing alarm bells ringing out through the hallways and the sounds of heavy, hurried footsteps running along the marble floor. An urgent report carrying the stench of blood had just crashed in like a terrifying storm, announcing that the Rossi family's crucial port area had just suffered a bloody attack by an unidentified armed force but bearing the brutally inhumane signature style of Victor Falcone's gang. This shocking event was like a match thrown straight into a powder keg, throwing the entire security force of the mansion into a red alert state at the highest level. The atmosphere instantly grew thick with the smell of ammunition and death as Julian Rossi, the boss who always maintained a terrifyingly calm demeanor, now furiously grabbed a thick Kevlar bulletproof vest, throwing it on to prepare to head out to the front lines. His angular face was etched with cold, murderous rays. Surrounding him was an elite bodyguard squad gripping pitch-black automatic rifles, all in a ready stance to set out to bathe in the enemy's blood to protect the family's honor and territory. Amidst the chaotic, noisy scene overflowing with burning murderous intent, when the armed convoy was only a few steps away from the massive oak doors at the main entrance, Clara made an incredibly crazy decision, risking her life to rush out from the dark zone of the hallway and stand with her arms spread wide, completely blocking the path of the boss and his bloodthirsty army. Dozens of cold gun barrels immediately jerked straight at her by conditioned reflex. The massive bodyguards could not hide their astonishment mixed with extreme indignation at the reckless, path-blocking action of a woman bearing the title of a fake wife during an extremely sensitive life-and-death moment. Julian paused for a beat, his fiercely angry eyes narrowing slightly, carrying a highly dangerous warning. His breathing was heavy like a wild beast being blocked from hunting its prey. But before the boss could shout or order his subordinates to violently clear the way, Clara had raised her head high, looking straight into the dark abyss in the eyes of that powerful man with a firmness as solid as rock. Unconcerned with the dozen or so gun barrels pointing at her head, in a resolute, ironclad voice, entirely refusing to let slip even a single tremor of fear, she loudly revealed the entire venomous, treacherous plan of the esteemed advisor Thomas Sterling. Every word from Clara was sharp as a razor blade, laying bare every meticulous detail about how that cunning old man had secretly colluded with Victor Falcone for a long time, arranging this bloody port attack merely as a perfect decoy to drain the core defense force of the mansion, thereby rolling out the red carpet for Falcone's team of assassins to easily sneak into the underground tunnel to kidnap her and the little boy Sam in order to snatch back the hard drive containing the deadly financial network. Julian seemed to remain rooted to the spot, his mind fiercely torn over the sky-high accusation aimed straight at the brother who had gone through life and death with him, who had stood shoulder to shoulder with him for over 20 grueling years in an underworld filled with betrayal. Understanding that empty words were never enough to bring down a supreme advisor, Clara decisively slipped her hand into her coat pocket, pulled out her smartphone, and held it straight up to the eye level of the man standing before her. On the touch screen glowing brightly amidst the dim space of the foyer, the image transmitting live from the hidden camera down in the basement was displaying with extreme sharpness the magnetic door area devoid of a single soul, a vivid, objective, and most cruel proof of the deadly trap silently counting down every minute and second waiting for the moment to ripen. A deathly silence immediately crashed down. Enveloping the massive main hall, all things seemed suspended as the Mafia boss glued his eyes to the phone screen broadcasting live from beneath the earth. The rugged lines on Julian's face hardened in an incredibly brutal realization, turning the initial impulsive flames of fury at his territory being attacked quickly into a dark, silent, and 1,000 times colder wrath, for he had truly recognized the most ruthless venomous snake coiling up preparing to strike back right under his own roof. The deathly silence enveloped the massive main hall as Julian glued his eyes to the phone screen broadcasting live from beneath the earth. The rugged lines on the boss' face hardened in an incredibly brutal realization, turning the initial impulsive flames of fury at his territory being attacked quickly into a dark, silent, and 1,000 times colder wrath. He had truly understood the whole matter, recognizing the most ruthless venomous snake coiling up preparing to strike back right under his own roof. A bitter betrayal from the subordinate who had stood side by side with him for over 20 grueling years. Without a roar, without a single curse, Julian merely gave a very decisive nod to Clara, a small gesture but containing the absolute recognition for the brave, small woman before him. With the sharp strategic mind of someone born to rule the underworld, Julian instantly devised an absolutely perfect counter-scheme to turn the tables in the blink of an eye. He ordered his most loyal bodyguard team to continue acting out the entire play that the cunning advisor had painstakingly staged. The entire convoy of glossy black armored cars, armed to the teeth, would roar and rush straight out of the mansion's main gate with sirens wailing and headlights blazing brightly, creating the most boisterous display of power possible to deceive the mass network of eyes and ears into thinking the boss had truly taken the bait and was on his way rushing to the bloody port. However, the truth was entirely the opposite as Julian, along with his most elite group of Night Shadow assassins, would silently jump out of the vehicles under the perfect cover of the dark, dense forest road, then secretly circle back to the fortress grounds via an abandoned side passage located deep beneath the wine cellar filled with moldy oak barrels, silently setting up an ambush right at his own headquarters. Before stepping into the silent night to cast the net of death, Julian turned to look at Clara with a resolute gaze, ordering her to immediately take the boy Sam and hide inside the fortified safe room concealed right behind the mahogany bookshelf in his office, and absolutely not to step outside until he personally opened the door. Clara hastily rushed to the bedroom, gently picked up her precious son who was still deep in a sound sleep, wrapped a thick wool blanket tightly around the child's small body, and ran for her life down the deserted hallway. As soon as she stepped over the solid cast steel threshold of the safe room, she immediately pressed the lockdown button, followed by a deafening slam echoing as a series of automatic alloy deadbolts snapped shut, completely isolating the mother and child from the danger lurking outside. The atmosphere inside the bunker room was stifling and freezing, dimly lit only by red emergency backup lights and a faint glow emitting from the smartphone screen resting neatly in the palm of her hand. Clara sat down on the carpeted floor, clutching Sam tightly to her chest, feeling every heartbeat thumping to burst her chest as her eyes remained constantly glued to the black and white frame live streaming the events from down in the service tunnel. Time dragged by in an agonizingly slow manner. Every minute and second ticking past felt like needles piercing the young mother's nerve system, which was taut as a bowstring. 55 minutes past 11 at night, then 58 minutes past 11 at night, the hallway down in the basement remained empty and chillingly silent. Panic began to sneak in and gnaw at Clara's mind. Thousands of terrifying questions flashed through her head, wondering if Thomas had suddenly changed the plan, or worse, if Julian had been ambushed on that dark forest road. Yet, the very moment the numbers on the phone screen turned to exactly 59 minutes past 11 at night, a large dark shadow dimly detached from the hidden corner of the wall and stepped step by step into the center of the frame. That familiar silhouette in the meticulously tailored suit was none other than Thomas Sterling, the supreme advisor wearing the face of a demon disguised as an angel. He stepped close to the magnetic door, gripping a pistol already fitted with a silencer at his hip, his cold eyes darting around to ensure no one was watching. Instead of placing his thumb on the biometric scanner system, he carefully pulled from his breast pocket a sophisticated copied keycard prepared in advance, slowly swiping it through the slot of the emergency override lock groove. A dry metallic sound echoed from the tiny audio recording, signaling the massive steel bolts had obediently retracted. Thomas pushed hard, swinging the heavy door wide open, revealing a hair-raising pitch-black void of the service tunnel stretching endlessly. Immediately, from within that deep dark zone, 6 muscular figures with completely covered faces stepped out into the light, clad in pitch-black tactical gear and carrying an array of short-barreled automatic rifles already cocked and ready to unleash bullets. That was the most notoriously brutal team of assassins belonging to the boss Victor Falcone, bloodthirsty hounds that had officially slipped through the strongest security shell of the Rossi family, smugly believing they were about to execute a bloody massacre to capture their prey. Alive without ever knowing the Reaper's scythe was resting right against the back of their necks. As soon as the 6 muscular figures gripping automatic weapons stepped fully inside the service tunnel with the triumphant smiles of hunters, the entire electrical system down in the basement was abruptly completely cut off, plunging everything into a thick, chillingly quiet darkness. Before Victor Falcone's group of assassins could regain their senses and raise their hands to grope in the dark, from the hidden corners of the wine cellar, Julian and his elite guard team, pre-equipped with infrared see-through goggles, simultaneously opened overwhelming fire. With a perfect and cold-blooded ambush tactic, within just a few brief seconds, the entire most ruthless, bloodthirsty army of the enemy was completely wiped out and subdued without having time to utter a single final word. When the deafening explosions just ceased, the emergency backup lighting system flicked on, casting a haunting, reddish glow over the hallway. Thomas Sterling, the traitor who just moments ago bore a triumphant expression, now fell flat onto the freezing floor. His eyes rolled back in terror as he realized his perfect plan had collapsed into pieces in the blink of an eye. He backed away trembling, his mouth stammering pathetic pleas for forgiveness, blaming it on coercion from the opposing faction, but the boss Julian only stepped forward coldly, with murderous intent blazing from his deep gaze. Unconcerned with the deceitful excuses of the one who invited the wolf into the house and threatened the lives of his wife and child, Julian personally punished the mole with a coup de grace shot, permanently eradicating the most venomous seed of betrayal that had existed for 20 years within the family's internal ranks. Returning to the silent safe room, the heavy lock bolts clacked before the solid cast steel door slowly opened, dispelling the suffocating night that was enveloping the mother and child Clara. Julian stepped in. He had shed the heavy bulletproof vest and wiped away the traces of the fierce battle below, leaving only an unusually gentle gaze as he stepped up to kneel on one knee on the floor right in front of the small woman. Bringing his large, calloused hand up to gently wipe away the tear rolling down Clara's pale cheek, he spoke in a deep, warm voice, expressing absolute respect and the deepest gratitude for her sharp intellect and extraordinary courage. Julian bitterly admitted that initially he only thought he was marrying into a risky responsibility in exchange for a golden piece of land, but tonight he realized that he had truly married a priceless queen. Now, they were no longer partners bound by a cold marriage certificate of a survival nature, but had officially become an unbreakable alliance of power, marking the beginning of a new empire ruled by a notorious boss and a resilient mother who never submitted to fate. Clara's highly dramatic story brings us an incredibly profound life lesson about the immense strength of maternal love, proving that when pushed into a corner, even the weakest mother can transform into a mighty warrior to protect her child. At the same time, it also honors the humane values of courage, intellect, and belief in oneself when facing seemingly insurmountable adversities in a life full of temptations and traps. Dear audience members, how do you feel about today's story? And do you see the shadow of that resilience in the very trials of real life that we face every day? Please feel free to share your comments and feelings from deep within your hearts in the section below the video so we can listen and understand together. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel, press the like button, and share this video with your relatives and friends to tune in and listen to many more fascinating and meaningful stories every day. Wishing everyone watching this video abundant health, a joyful spiritual life, and may every passing day be filled with peace and perfect happiness. Hello and see you again in the next video. Goodbye, and see you again in the next video.